who had big business in China, and by partisan ideologues who played up fear for profit. Again, Project Veritas's hidden cameras uncovered CNN's mind control techniques here.
Like, you can shape an entire people's perception about anything on how you do it, right? Like, just by like forcing a story to help like your platform, you know, like you can all of a sudden say like coal is the future of like energy. Well, that can be propaganda because like who owns the company might have stake in like coal mining.
Later in the video, the CNN director reveals the network will be pivoting from COVID-19 to going green this year. There is indeed a lot of green to be had by going green. For CNN's parent company, AT&T, who just a few years ago bought a giant amount of wind power in Texas and Oklahoma, and this year expects to cash in on Biden's $3 trillion infrastructure blowout, with green giveaways to donors and fat federal contracts. Maybe going green is AT&T's way of being woke, so politicians turn their back on their joint ventures with Chinese military-controlled slave labor camps. Big media happy to run disinformation leaks by the intelligence agencies to dirty up Trump with Russia. You remember the Kalusia hoax, the Russia bounty story. But when real news breaks, damaging Democrats with China, like Hunter's laptop, the intel community, big tech, and big media shut it down. So-called journalists are complicit in the cover-up. They force-feed you the most preposterous lies until you believe it's the truth, or don't even bother to speak up. They told us the protests last summer were mostly peaceful, as fires lit up the screens behind them. They told us Trump was a Russian agent, the most patriotic pro-American businessman of the last quarter century. Cultural critic Theodore Darmpel described this as a technique born from communist propaganda. Here it is. In my study of communist societies, I came to the conclusion that the purpose of communist propaganda was not to persuade or convince, not to inform, but to humiliate. And therefore, the less it corresponded to reality, the better. When people are forced to remain silent, when they are being told the most obvious lies, or even worse, when they are forced to repeat the lies themselves, they lose, once and for all, their sense of probity. To assent to obvious lies is in some small way to become evil oneself. One standing to resist anything is eroded and even destroyed. A society of emasculated liars is easy to control. American society, bludgeoned into submission by lies, is incapable of standing up for themselves and exhibiting strong moral principles of honesty and decency. We're basically easy to control once we've been humiliated into reciting the lies we're fed. So corporate America gets everything they want, even if it destroys the middle class. And we just sit here and take it. Corporate America and Biden's donors get open borders, cheap labor for the service industry and to keep their properties perfect, and American wages down. Chinese slave labor to keep profit margins fat at the expense of American factories and human rights. Trillions in new spending. The Fed just prints it and we rack up debt to China. But Wall Street loves it because it juices the indexes, and years later, after years of bonuses, they'll get bailed out when the market crashes. Meanwhile, the media keeps us distracted and divided by the race card. Big tech and big media brand Biden as moderate, while he governs as a stone-cold liberal. Any objection to the Democrat agenda is controversialized as racist, bigoted, or homophobic. And corporate America runs tail at the slightest whiff of controversy, believing the hype from the mob, sacrificing their integrity on the altar of wokeism so the mob doesn't come for them. Now, most news consumers casual we're busy. They glance at the headlines, big media narratives just kind of wash over them. Most Americans' lives are filled with work and family and commuting, sports, and, dealing with the house. And it takes a lot of effort to dig deep past the front page. But it's become so blatant now that even casual news consumers see the distortions. Trust in the media has hit an all-time low, and now a majority of Americans want to break up the big tech companies. The American people need to communicate to their politicians that it's time to go back to the Teddy Roosevelt days of trust busting. The very essence of the United States of America is at stake. Joining me now to react, Glenn Greenwald, journalist and author, Securing Democracy, My Fight for Press Freedom and Justice in Bolsonaro's Brazil. All right, Glenn, we can all see now that corporate media has kind of adopted the language and the agenda of the Democratic Party, and they're participating in partisan politics more than I've ever seen it in my lifetime. And they do it under the guise of compassion and open-mindedness. But tell us what you think is really going on.
I think a couple of things are going on. Number one is I think all of those trends that you just identified severely worsened during the Trump era. Beginning really in 2016, they obviously had no expectation Trump would win. And then when he did, it was an incredible shock to the system of media and political experts. They felt like they had lost control over the discourse, that their ability to predict what would happen was taken away from them, and they kind of went into this panic and hysteria mode and ultimately convinced themselves that what they were dealing with was not a president with whom they had ideological disagreements or who they thought was occasionally unethical or even dishonest, but actually like a Hitler figure. They would say that explicitly over the last couple of years. And if you really believe that you're on the front lines of this like demented fantasy where you're defending American democracy from some kind of like Nazi movement and that half the country supports this sort of evil, you're willing essentially to do anything in order to advance your agenda. And in many ways, they became mirror images of what they claimed that Trump was. They threw out all standards, all ethics, in order to achieve not a journalistic goal, but a political one. And then I think the other part of it is, as you alluded to, they know that they are losing trust and faith on the part of the public. Their ability to control the flow of information is slipping out of their fingers. And as they do, they're resorting to the same thing people always resort to when they want to hold on to power, which is despotic tactics and censorship. They're trying to silence anybody who disagrees with them or who questions or challenges them or offers a different perspective by getting them kicked off the internet or cable TV. In the case of Fox News, they're really actually now explicitly advocating for that. As they feel themselves getting weaker and more desperate, their tactics are getting more repressive and more dishonest.
And you just brought that up because James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, whose videos we just played you, has been permanently suspended from Twitter. So it is following that same path.